So in this video, I want to explore the nature, the makeup of a wound and the directions of healing each particular layer and adding to each particular layer. So the pattern that we're looking at is the bringing of the virginal princess to the stone altar to be sacrificed to the dragon, to protect the old institutions by giving up and betraying the young. A culture and a pattern that is understandable, because in many cases the young, the innocent, have no political power. So when there's a lack of character, a lack of vision, when there's fear or scarce resources, it is a cultural pattern to sacrifice the future for the present, debt, credit cards, to sacrifice the child for the parent, the student for the teacher. The makeup of the wound is several-fold. Trauma plays an important part because in order to grow as human beings, we must have a balance of certainty from which we deviate with chaos. The need for certainty is so strong that we don't move away. We don't explore the world or stretch our capacity until we are safe, until we have a secure base, which in the mammalian design is a safe, welcome and consistent return to the parental mammals that will protect a child with their life. This is the state of certainty and familiarity that allows for the expression of all creativity, all growth, all newness, all adventure, the element of variety. When one is born into a traumatic environment, one, that is not repaired, two, one doesn't have a chance to calibrate and align to who we are as an individual being. That is put aside in the first job of finding certainty as we look to calibrate and attach to a coping strategy that gives us an edge in a sociopathic environment. So this is the first step of the wound. A birth is induced without preparing the state of safety and stability in which to raise the child, the animal. Number two, the trauma is sustained. The chaos, the lack of certainty, the lack of safety, the lack of familiarity is sustained in a way that keeps the brain constantly revved up in a state of high alert, without repair. What often happens is that the most certain thing in the environment is the wound itself, is the state of high arousal. And so seeking for something that's constant in a changing environment with unstable people, a child may grab tightly to the only thing about their experience which is stable, which is terror, with an identity not of self, but an identity in the frozen shape of the trauma that is not healed, that is not repaired. Now we have a new crisis because the very stability, it's created a little bit of a paradox here, because the more trauma that is in the environment, the stronger the need for certainty. The stronger the need for certainty, the more a child will grasp to whatever is there. When healthy things in one's core essence are not available to be grasped, the child will grasp to the wound itself, because it's constant. It repeats and repeats and repeats. It's a stable wound. It's existing in the parents, and it's being externalized and externalized. And so the child internalizes this wound. Another thing that can happen is that the security that is in a healthy family found within relationships is moved to objects, which is particularly normal, particularly common in a materialistic culture, in a culture that says things are everything. You're only as valuable and as important as your things, as your appearance. And I know for myself that once that transition occurred, the position and stability of my things became sacrosanct. The first question I asked myself when I returned home to my room, which was my sanctuary from chaos, was, are all of my things in the exact position I left them? Has anyone broken in? Has anything been moved? Has anything been touched? Now, in a healthy environment, it might be, are my parents happy to see me? Are my parents loving one another? Are my parents loving my siblings? But when those stable sources of calming and relaxation are not available, one has to find certainty in something. And I reallocated it, and rewired it to things. And if my things were in the right place, then I could grow. Then I could relax. But you can see the problem when it comes to living. I've isolated myself already at 14, withdrawing from the family. A very common coping mechanism in a traumatic childhood, to withdraw. And of course, the challenge is one cannot partner with someone without sharing space. But this was one of the most delicate aspects of my first relationship, navigating the situation where a lover for the first time was going to enter my house. It was easy when we met long distance on vacation because they weren't my things, but now she was going to enter my house and she was going to touch my things. And what's really important to understand, because this is an aspect of misunderstanding and shame. So the first element of the wound is the traumatization. The second is forcing the child to develop an adaptive coping strategy where they hold on to something. The third is this is not explained or understood by anyone, and so it is often shamed. So the person who suddenly forms an attachment, it's like a lifeboat. Because when the only thing that is protecting you from an ocean of unexpressed and overwhelming and traumatic emotion is your coping strategy, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be smoking, it could be singing, it could be running, it could be bossing people around. Whatever the coping strategy is, it's a very thin barrier between you and overwhelming trauma. But in a culture that doesn't educate us as a populace, of course, we don't know why we're doing it. We just know that we're weird. So this is the first layer, is the coping strategy, which is a very vulnerable one. Because the same sociopathic people who are hurting you and those around you can move your things. It's a very vulnerable coping strategy, but it's better than nothing. It allowed me to grow. When I put a lock on my door and my things were safe, I could calm down, and then I could write, then I could explore, I could work on goals, and I could learn. So this is, this is one thing. It's not a conscious strategy. The next part of the wounding is to identify the child with the coping strategy, not with who they are. Not to see who they are, but to induce a coping strategy at a young age and then identify the child with the coping strategy. So that's the kind of layer 3 of the wound. And having done this effectively, the fourth layer of the wound is to shame the coping strategy. You idiot. You fool. Look at that fool caring so much about his things. Why don't you share more? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Why do you waste so much time with this, that, and the other? So what's happening, of course, is a complete externalization of shame. Because a parent who gives birth to a child in a traumatic environment is basically saying, I don't have control of my environment. I don't have parental skills. I can't keep my child safe even as much as a monkey could 100,000 years ago. And I don't know what I'm doing. That's the first thing. But that's not owned and acted on. That's not used as the basis to get help. That's used as the basis to traumatize a child. Then the child develops a coping mechanism, and it is often not understood. One of my few aspects, one of the few seconds of physical violence in my life was having developed this deeply protective field around things that ought to be around states and around people, but giving up on that in an environment where that couldn't be, and establishing a protective field around things as the basis of my sanity and growing. Then when those things are threatened, it feels like my life is threatened, because it is. Because those things are protecting me from a life-threatening experience of emotion that I don't know how to deal with. Trauma and shame fuse into one. Shame is trauma. And we can't deal with it alone. but we certainly can't deal with it with abusers who are shaming us for experiencing emotion. And my father was trying to penetrate this barrier, and I said, no, you cannot come into my room. He said, I'm coming in. I said, if you take a step forward, I will punch you. I mean, I've never done this in my life. I've been violent maybe 3 or 4 seconds of my entire life. He took a step forward, and I gave him a quick, about this piece, but right in the solar plexus. He said, how dare you? I said, you can't come in. He said, I'm calling the police. I said, go right ahead. You are not coming in. And he backed off. And because he listened to violence and nothing else, my sanity was protected. My coping strategy was protected from the emotions he had induced, from the emotions he had not protected me from or taught me how to deal with. And equilibrium was restored. And this is a very important thing to understand about violence. My belief is that violence is appropriate, effective, and evoked when one person's pain is so denigrated and disrespected, so ignored, so misunderstood and shamed, that it is left in a chronic state and added to when someone does anything at all to protect or reduce the pain. So, in that situation, having been induced to a state where the only safety I could find was the stability of things, now I'm being threatened by the very person who induced this state, who has never protected me. And he's threatening to expose me to a level of emotion he doesn't know how to deal with, that he doesn't understand. He's not respecting boundaries. And he's escalating the panic by not respecting boundaries. And he's coming forward. And what I do with that punch is I give him a 10% dose of the pain that he is inducing in me. I'm transferring 10% of my pain caused by him back. And because it's now his pain, and because he realizes that I'm willing to escalate, that he can't intimidate, he backs down. And if he had continued, my psychological framework, my house of cards, manufactured in a toxic environment, would have fallen down. And neither he nor I would have known how to repair that. And that's why the boundary was sacred. That's why it's one of about 5 seconds in my life when I've used physical force to protect myself. This is a wounding. The wounding that rather than being protected by your protector, you are being assaulted, not protected, induced into a vulnerable state, induced into a coping strategy, and then having the coping strategy assaulted by not respecting boundaries, by not understanding it. That's the next layer of the abuse. Now, it could have gone deeper. My father could have kept pushing on it, kept drilling in there, escalated the violence, and then started to shame me for the coping strategy of protecting the coping strategy, and saying, what he did was he shamed and humiliated the coping strategy, but he respected the protection of the coping strategy after that initial, the one time I've, been physical with my parents. And he didn't shame that, he dropped it. But he did shame my obsession with my things. And some of that sunk in. Why am I so particular about my things? What's wrong with me? So this is the next layer in the dis-ease. This is the next layer as layers are built up. What's wrong with me that I'm behaving differently and not as I would like to be? There's some part of me that needs this coping strategy. Because this ties in with the next layer of the wound, which is silent denial, the superhuman shame dynamic. The parent can do no wrong. So the parent doesn't acknowledge wrong. So the parent doesn't apologize or bring attention in doing so that could help the child realize this is not about them. This is about dysfunctional parents. And I believe this is the first real choice and character point. Because having been induced into coping strategies that were so extreme by the high facilitators that, I had never experienced anything like it, that I had very little control over. Now, what I mean by that is a coping strategy where you start to feel out of control is a position like this. It's like, let's take the issue with my things. So things have become sacred as the one source of stability. Stability is sacred because growth and learning can't happen without it. And there's no chance of getting out of this sick environment without growth and learning. So you better find something stable. And then it needs to be defended, because the same environment that induces that kind of coping strategy typically does not respect the coping strategy. And so the identity is forming around that time, and it's wanting to take shape. Like, who am I? Well, we are what we do, what we feel, what we say, what we think. That's what we say we are. So if I obsess about things, that's a pattern. Then the question is, what do I think about it? And that's, to a certain extent, borrowed from the outer environment. Am I a hoarder? Am I greedy? Am I a control freak? What is the available template for someone who is very attached to things? But the self has to form an identity, a story, a narrative that says, here's who I am different from these people. And the most dangerous aspect in the wound is that when a parent will not own anything is wrong with them, they're great parents. They're amazing. You, children, are lucky. Then the child will often take on the parent's shame. Anything that's weird or dysfunctional, it's my fault. And the insecure parent will jump on that and affirm that, yes, it's your fault. It's your fault. I'm glad you realize that. It's your fault. We're working our butts off over here. We're doing this. We're dealing with the economy, da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and it's your fault. You're not appreciating. You're not da-da-da-da-da. It's your fault. You're ruining this household. You better get it together so that we can survive. So that's another wound. Giving the power to the child. Giving the power to the child. The responsibility for the safety of the whole family and the shame to the child. Well, this is a terrifying thing for a child to deal with because, of course, they know they don't have the ability, the skill, the legal authority, or anything else, the work, the job. They don't have what it takes to protect the family, but they're being given this power. You know, that's when, and it can happen in various levels. Go talk to your mother. Your mother says this. Your mother says that. Your father says this. You know, I have no idea why he's doing this. You know how your father is. You go and try and sort it out. You know, I'm just a mere helpless victim here. You know, I certainly can't help you, and neither can I. I mean, and there's this dance of martyrhood back and forth. Oh, you know your father. Oh, you know your mother. Why don't you talk to your mother? Why don't you ask her why she doesn't do this, that, and the other? Because that's why you can't do this, that, and the other. Or why don't you ask him why he did? You know, it's... So there's this layer. I mean, it's got a comedic element in our culture because it's so horrifying. It's so horrifying to lay this on a traumatized child who has nowhere to turn to other than coping strategies. And then you have wounds added to the wounds, re-traumatization, betrayal. So betrayal is another layer of the wound. The child, of course, will do what they can to please, to grow, to this, that, and the other. I need this, I want this. And what can happen is a parent will set the child up. Say, okay, if you do this, 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 and this, I will do this. And if the child really needs that, they may do that a few times. And the parent may even be surprised. Well, I've changed my mind. Well, it's too late now. Well, da-da-da-da-da. You've caught me at a bad time, so I'm not going to keep my promise. And the child needed that for some aspect of coping in shame and image and whatever. And the desperation drove them to do all of that. And now they realize they're being lied to. But they're being lied to in a very particular way. They're being lied to, and they're asked to cover the lie. They're asked to cover the lie with another lie. Would you mind not calling this a lie? I am lying to you. Though let's not use that word. That's a bad word. I'm realizing I can't keep my agreement to you. And you need to understand that. And you need to be mature enough to know that these are the kinds of things that happen. Can you be mature? Can you be mature in this situation? Because I can't be. I can't be there with your feelings. I can't acknowledge my impact. I can't see what I'm doing. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to make amends. I don't want to make another plan. I just want to let you go. See, in the betrayal, it's a new hurt. There needs to be a new coping mechanism. Now, when this becomes chronic and perpetual, of course, a child can't deal with the uncertainty of not having their needs met. And so this is how my parents drove each of my siblings into various extreme behaviors that had one thing in common. My parents, who would not keep their word, their commitment, who would not own a single mistake, who would not be there for the feelings of hurt and pain, would be manipulated by the extreme behavior into doing what they said they would do, and which is basic human being. In other words, they'd actually do most of the time, providing someone ran around the room screaming, shouting, and breaking things, providing my brother ran off and stole a car, providing my sister gave them a stern enough lecture and shouted and this and that and the other. And so every sibling goes off and forms a new coping strategy around a new wound that is not acknowledged. And this is happening at a young age. And adult children in an adult body understand, well, they feel manipulated. You bad children, how dare you manipulate us like this? How dare you have a tantrum like, okay, I'll do what I said I was going to do, fine, but, you are terrible children. You need to see this, you're terrible. Look at what I'm having to live with, a tantrum, you've ruined the house. And of course the children look around at what their coping strategy was. They're like, yeah, I have ruined the house. Yes, I did scream. No, that doesn't sound very kind. You got points there, parents. Maybe we are the bad people that our parents say we are. I feel so ashamed. God will punish you. I feel so terrified. But what is a child to do in that situation? What is a child to do? And of course, when I babysat them, they didn't have to do this. They didn't have to lie. They didn't have to tantrum. They didn't have to be violent. They didn't have to shout. They didn't have to break things. They didn't have to threaten anyone. They could just be normal, healthy children. And they were so happy. So happy. So contented. So peaceful. So productive. So creative. And we had such a good time for those rare hours when my parents were away and were not inducing layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of the wound. The final betrayal is when the coping strategy is the opposite of the self, the opposite of what wants to come through, what is asking for permission, for a safe and healthy space for this to come through. And the world becomes too threatening as a teenager facing that adulthood. It's a big chasm in a modern world. In a world in which money is everything, in which if you don't have this look and this thing, you're nobody. Kids are not idiots. They're smart. They're intelligent. They know. They see the game. They know what they're in for. And the gap becomes too big between who they are and their coping strategy. The shame becomes too deep. The terror becomes too loud. They don't want anything to do with this world. And every step of the way, the adults, the teachers around, they shame the coping mechanism just like the parent. You idiot. Why are you like that? Get it together. Bye. Get out of here. See you tomorrow. Why can't you focus on your homework? What's wrong with you? Let's talk about you. Let's not talk about your parents. Let's not talk about your culture. Let's not talk about what it's like to be a young person hurtling towards this nightmare of a capitalist, materialist culture in which human beings are sold out every day for money. We're not too far away from slavery. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about you. You know, other kids seem to be able to concentrate. Why can't you? It's probably because I'm bad, I'm wrong. Like my parents said, like I feel inside. I don't like this person I've become. I don't know how to change it. I don't know why I've become this way. There's something fundamentally flawed about me. And it's at this juncture that the wound of inadequacy, shame, and unlovability is completely externalized and downloaded and completely internalized and held onto as one of the few stable experiences of a child's life. I've always been inadequate. I've always been a disappointment. I've never been what my parents wanted. I have always been the problem. And that's the only stable thing I can hold on to. And I don't want to let it go, because out there are emotions that I haven't a clue how to deal with. Out there are emotions that I will get in trouble and be beaten for talking about. Out there are emotions that are so big, I feel lost. I feel confused. I don't know who I am. But I know who this abused coping mechanism is, and I'm going to hang on to it for dear life. That's what I know. That's what I've been told. That's what I saw. That's who I am. And to watch 4 beautiful human beings be wrapped in a web this thick, this pervasive, and try and survive using all the coping mechanisms available to them is one of the saddest things I've ever had to do. And knowing that the adults around me sold each of them out. Sold each of them out. Rather than face the discomfort and the inadequacy that they would feel if they let this truth in and let in their choice to do nothing about it. So that gets to the final layer, the cultural reinforcement. That never happened. That's a lie. You're ungrateful. You're out of touch. You have good parents. You are lucky. There are people in China who are starving and don't have food. I mean, not anymore, but you are wrong for feeling this way. What you are feeling has nothing to do with what's happening. Your feelings and your perceptions are insane. They have nothing to do with the reality. And we will punish you. We will shame you. We will avoid you. We will lie to you. We will threaten you. We will manipulate you. We will bribe you. Just don't talk about it. These feelings are not welcome here. And it's done. You have completely destroyed an innocent person's life, and by questioning their sanity, they have no one to blame but themselves, and they do. This is the mechanism. What is the remedy? Number one, sanity. Wait a minute here. Emotions are responsive. There is no emotion that is evil. There is no emotion that is not natural. Emotions reflect in the emotional body the objects around it, the energy, the thoughts, the paradigms, the beliefs, the cultural taboos, the secrets, the unspoken, the observed. This directly creates in an alchemical connection. It produces, as this intersects with the values, with the coping strategies, with the needs of an individual, it produces a sound, an emotion. And an intelligent culture, an intelligent observer knows from that sound, knows from that pattern of feeling, knows from its intensity, its where it's focused and all of that, exactly what's going on. And with that message, an intelligent healer, practitioner, human being, friend can help a person see the connection between their feelings and the environment around them without any judgment of the feeling, without any shame of the feeling, without an internalization that this is who you are. This is a feeling produced by the interference pattern of who you are and what you value and what your coping strategies are and your needs are, and this environment. And hate is symptomatic of these kinds of things going on. Rage is symptomatic of these kinds of things going on. Joy is symptomatic of these things going on. And you don't try and give water an order to take a certain shape. You change the structure of the container, and the water transforms with it. It's a neutral force. It is what it is in that interference pattern with all the objects, psychic and otherwise, in its environment. And the most valuable information you can have is, number one, the knowledge that your feelings are a direct reflection of what's going on some level. Number two, that they're all healthy and giving a message. Number three, there's nothing taboo about any feeling. And number four, the way to change them is to diagnose the disease in the environment and change it. You don't change the kid, you change the parent. You don't change the kid, you change the school. But of course, we don't champion the individual as a general rule. The individual is sacrificed to the dragon. You help the person see why. A healthy human being talking to me about my pain, my loneliness, my disgust, and my rage at my parents for doing this to my siblings, would say something like this: Dane, do you notice how much you love and care about your siblings? Do you notice how helpless you feel? You can't even leave your room without being attacked. Every time you try and interfere to help on their behalf, it gets twisted around and thrown back of you in a way that brings out the worst in you. You've tried this, you've tried that, you've tried this. And you're watching these beautiful human beings be turned into a nightmare in such a way that they don't seem to understand that it's happening to them. And you're watching them go down into a hell that no human being deserves to be put in, least of all by their parents. And you know it's wrong, and it hurts you, and it's depressing because you can't do anything about it. There's no adult in this culture that's sane enough to listen to you. The answer isn't foster home or blaring police sirens. There's no one that even listens to you. Very few people will even understand what you're talking about. And you're alone. You're 14 years old, you're 15 years old, and you've been hurt yourself. And you've been trapped in some of the same traps. And what hate is an expression of powerlessness. It's an expression of grief. It's an expression of rage. And hate's a step up from despair. Hate is protecting you from a despair in which you would kill yourself. Hate is getting you through. You're not wrong for feeling hate. You're not unchristian. You're not bad. What your parents and this culture are doing is abominable. And you're smart enough to know it's happening to other people as well. This isn't personal. And you don't know what to do, and you don't feel safe, and you're terrified, you're lonely in that. And every time you try and talk about it, someone puts you down. Of course you feel rage. That's where the rage comes in. The anger at being betrayed. You are a healthy, normal, loving human being who has been set up to fail by a country, a culture, a school system, and a family that has sacrificed all of you to maintain the cultural norm. And that's sad. And you care about people. And you know that. You care about people. You know it's not personal. You are feeling the sadness any sane human being would feel who saw this happening. But you're not dealing with sane human beings. They have had the same bribery to deny what is going on. What does this do? It brings sanity. It brings dignity. It brings relief. It heals loneliness. It invites more sensitivity and truth. And it leads to the question, why? Why is the world set up this way? Why have my parents never received emotional training? Why is there no aptitude test for parents? There's an aptitude test before learning to drive because we don't want people to go out and in ignorance hurt other people. But isn't parenting a lot more skilled than learning to drive? Those are good questions. Those are intelligent questions. That's the kind of person we need in this world. Well, I want to be that kind of person. I want to be the kind of person that cares about this, that tells the truth, that takes a stand for children, that supports parents in seeing without shaming them what can be done. That's what I want to be. Yes, Dane, that's your love. That's your care. That's who you are. All of this stuff, this isn't you. This is what you've needed to become to cope in a sick household. Yes, this doesn't feel like me. What can we do? It just takes one courageous, sane adult to take a stand for a child who wants to see, who wants to love, who wants to break free of the lies, who's learning, who's growing, who's reading, who's meditating, who's doing yoga. But that's not what I received. The one adult who would talk to me 1 hour a week at my request. It was a curative eurythmist at a Waldorf school that I used to attend. I said, I want to continue talking with you because at least she didn't directly shame me. But when I talked about these feelings, she didn't help me see my love. She didn't help me see that these feelings were natural. She chided me gently and added guilt to the mix. Don't you see your parents are doing the best they can? Couldn't you help out a little bit more? Couldn't you do this? Couldn't you be bigger than them? I'm not going to talk to them. I'm not going to help you out. I'm not going to validate the overwhelming feelings this is producing. But couldn't you just do? Couldn't you just do? Let me add a little bit more to the mix of psycho-spiritual guilt in emotional bypass and show you how a true Christian would handle this situation at age 14, 15, 16. And please don't tell me about your hate with your parents. I don't like hearing that. Oh, that smoke detector is making a loud noise. Oh, could you just take the battery out on that? Let's not look too deeply where the fire is coming from. Let's just take the battery out. It makes such a shrill noise. Because the fire's over there. And I'm hearing the noise. But I don't want to go out and put out that fire. Sanity is number one. Apology is number two. I am so sorry that you're born into this culture where this is how people behave. I am so sorry that you have these parents. I am so sorry that I'm only willing to do so much. I'm so sorry that your parents will never apologize. I'm so sorry you are born to children in an adult body. And I'm sorry for your parents because no one's done this for them either. You're living the hell they lived through because this culture doesn't care enough to develop emotional technology. In the last 2,000 years, we've gone from rocks to Samsung Note 6. But we're still dealing with the Stone Age of emotions. We're still abusing our children like we always did. But we're being a little bit more cute about it. We're doing a variety of things. We're playing the little name games and all that. And there's still no resource for you in this situation. you need someone to share that amount of grief with, that amount of hurt with, that amount of pain with, that amount of loneliness with. And one person can do that. One person can validate and lift the veil of insanity that is universally enforced. Universally enforced. And invite and validate and help you see who you are and apologize, and in doing so share some of the grief and acknowledge the feelings. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling this way. One person can lift those two layers. That's about it. They can champion you, go one step further. There's nothing wrong with you. You're in a sick environment. Can I help? What do you need? How can I support you? That's proactive masculine love. It would feel great if you could give me a hug and I could cry from time to time. It would feel great if I could talk with you 3 or 4 hours a week rather than one. It would be great if we could brainstorm in a way to help my children, my siblings. Is there a book my parents could read? Is there something? Could you help? That's the next step. Now that's when things really turn around. Because when you've received nothing but weight and demand, and it's unsafe to be yourself, it's one trauma after another. Having someone there, someone who cares, someone who's listening, someone that wants to know, someone that gets it is all the difference in the world. I have never had that in my life. My partner never had that in her life until following the thread of pain, following the nuances of loneliness, of terror, of betrayal, of lies, of rage and of grief. I was able to see what I needed, what I was not receiving from my parents, from Peter, from the high organization, and decided to give that to someone else who needed it. And I'm proud to say that within 9 months, we've been tracking her beautiful ascendancy, her growth on so many levels. There's many areas it's happening, and we look at what percentage of growth and healing and learning in each area. It adds up to more than 2,000%. Because someone listened. Because someone validated. Because someone cared. Because someone gave the shame back to her parents, her church, and her culture, and her country, and her neighbor. Gave back the lies that it was all her fault. Created a safe place where she was not traumatized again and again and again. Gave her a meaningful arena in which to contribute her beautiful gifts. And in 9 months, one of the greatest transformations of my life, one of the greatest honors to participate. She has gone from that prison into understanding it, to seeing it, to giving, to loving, to being closer to herself and knowing who she is for the first time. It takes one person. It's not hard. But it is courageous, because before I could give that to another, I had to feel and understand and let in the wound. The insanity is healed by validation. The loneliness and the shame is healed with empathy and validation and love. It's showing how every rage, every fear, every hate is connected to something we care about, something beautiful. The care of the innocent, the care of another. Allies help and acknowledging the problem is the next wave. Allies and help and acknowledging the problem is the next wave. Proactive masculine support, the kind of support that we will mobilize in 10 minutes to make $1,000, to make $10,000, to make more products faster. The science of effective strategic response. This is important. You need help. Your feelings are real. What can we do? How can we form a synergy and a team that's effective here? You deserve that. Just that. Having one person (10, 15 minutes a day) when someone's ready and able to receive that support can transform someone's life. 10, 15 minutes a day. It changes everything. It changes everything. The next unveiling of that wound is to understand something about trauma. Number one, you can't deal with it alone. Number two, it's the most painful and overwhelming feelings you're ever going to feel. Number three, you've dissociated. They're suppressed. They're unconscious. Number four, last time you felt these feelings, your life was in danger. You need a safe space, and you need a safe protocol. You need help, and you need to understand the biology and the logic of the emotion. You need to understand that. Here is the key. This is the book. This is the language going on inside your brain and why. This is how it developed. Learn this key and unlock your freedom. Empowerment. Empowerment through knowledge. And understanding dawns. This is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. And this is, again, not my problem. This is not my issue. This is a parent's issue, a culture's issue, a school's issue, a country's issue. It's not an innocent child's issue that comes in ready to attune and grow to what's there. I need to face this trauma with help, with love, with an ally that is taking a stand for me. I need to pivot my coping mechanism. This is huge. Now, a lot of the traumatic coping mechanism resolves, and the insanity and the shame and the dissonance with the core self energy is starting to shake. And now, I need to peel away the coping strategies that were necessary in a sick environment and replace them with who I am, appropriate in a healthy environment. Safe and secure that I have a guide until I can pivot from one to the other. Safe and secure that I have a guide that I have someone who's willing to take a stand as I go through this life-threatening emotion. Someone to educate me, and so that I know I'm not in a life-threatening situation right now. I'm just reconnecting with those feelings so I can release them and come back to who I am. This is the journey from sociopathic, self-destructive, unattuned insanity, misery and agony, back to health. It is the most important journey we can take, and we cannot engage consistently in loving, intimate, sustainable relationships without taking this journey. This journey is absolutely impossible without allies, without help, without knowledge. And sadly, in many situations, all three are missing. There's nothing wrong with us. With the self-reinforcing coping mechanisms many of us cling to desperately, unable to relinquish the hold from something so certain that is terrifying to hang on to, that is shameful to hang on to, but even more overwhelming and terrifying to let go of, and try and find our way back to ourselves. And those of us that start to awaken without this support and without this resource start living in agony at the dissonance between who we are and our coping strategy, without the pathway, without the help, without the care to go from the one to the other. It's not worth living. We need this. High needs this. Our world needs this. We need the keys, we need the tools, and it is not that hard. If I could do it on my first attempt without any training, while in severe trauma myself, just because I cared and I saw, anyone can do it. But we need help, we need empowerment, we need the tools, we need the ethics that will not abandon a child in that trauma to cover up our inadequacy, our overwhelm, our fear. We need those ethics, we need them desperately. That's how a wound gets built up. That's how it gets unraveled. I've spent an enormous amount of energy managing all these coping mechanisms. And it's in the last few months, it's in these days that I'm seeing things clearly enough to be able to articulate them and to share them.